Welcome to our deep dive into the world of Ludwig van Beethoven. We're going way beyond, the iconic da-da-da-da-deem that pretty much everyone knows. And we're going to explore, the man behind the music. We've got some excerpts from the untold struggles and triumphs of Beethoven.
Oh, very cool.
And I think you'll be surprised by what we uncover. Beethoven's life story is anything but a smooth melody. So
yeah, his story, it really is fascinating and full of contradictions too. He achieved this immense fame in his lifetime, but also experienced some pretty profound isolation, particularly, as his hearing deteriorated.
So let's start at the beginning. His early life. I was reading that Beethoven didn't exactly have like a picture-perfect childhood.
No, not at all. He was born in Bonn, Germany in 1770, and his father, Johann, was a court musician. But Johann was also an alcoholic and pretty abusive. He saw young Ludwig's musical potential and pushed him relentlessly, hoping to create a child prodigy like Mozart. There are even stories of Johann dragging Ludwig out of bed in the middle of the night to practice for guests.
Oh, wow. That's intense. I mean, it's one thing to encourage your child's talents, but to force them into practice under duress. That seems like it would create a pretty complicated relationship with music.
It definitely seems to have had a lasting impact on him, He yearned for recognition and approval, yet he also rebelled against authority throughout his life.
So this difficult relationship with his father, was that the only hardship he faced early on?
Unfortunately, no. His mother, Maria Magdalena, was often ill and couldn't provide much support. And the family struggled financially. Beethoven had to start working at a young age to help contribute. Imagine shouldering those responsibilities while also trying to develop your musical talent.
It sounds like his childhood was like a real crucible. Do you think those early experiences of, hardship and responsibility are reflected in his music at all?
Absolutely. Think about one of his most famous pieces, Moonlight Sonata. It's full of melancholy and longing, a sort of searching quality that many scholars believe reflects, the emotional landscape of his early life.
That's interesting. It's like you can hear echoes of his childhood struggles in the music.
Yeah. And those struggles weren't limited to his personal life. As Beethoven's musical career began to take off, he was also facing a new and terrifying challenge: hearing loss.
This is what he's most known for, right? Mm-hmm. The fact that he continued composing despite losing his hearing. I have to admit, I always found that almost impossible to grasp. How can a musician create such powerful music without being able to hear it?
It is remarkable, and it speaks to his incredible tenacity and the depth of his musical genius. Around the age of 28, Beethoven started noticing difficulties hearing high-pitched sounds. Can you imagine the fear he must have felt? I mean, for a musician, hearing loss is like a professional death sentence.
It must have been devastating. Did he stop composing when his hearing started to fade?
No, and that's the truly incredible part. He went through these periods of despair and isolation, even contemplated suicide. There's a document called the Heiligenstadt Testament, where he pours out all of his anguish and frustration over his hearing loss, but ultimately he refused to give up on his art.
So how did he keep composing? How did he even hear the music he was creating?
He had to completely reimagine his process. He relied on his inner ear, that deep understanding of musical structure and harmony, that he developed over years of study and practice. He would also literally feel the vibrations of the music. There are accounts of him placing his head on the piano to sense the sound through the wood, and even biting down on a stick attached to the instrument to feel the vibrations through his jawbone.
Wow. That's incredible. It's like he was tapping into an entirely different dimension of musical experience, almost like a sixth sense.
Yeah, and this shift in his compositional process had a profound impact on the music itself. It's in this period. As his hearing deteriorates, that we see Beethoven pushing the boundaries of the classical style, venturing into new territories of expression that would later come to define the Romantic period.
So are you saying that his hearing loss, in a way, contributed to his innovation as a composer?
It's a complex question, but many music scholars believe so. It's like his deafness forced him to delve deeper into the essence of music, to find ways to express emotions and ideas that went beyond the purely auditory experience.
That's a fascinating thought. It's like what could have been a tragic ending actually became a catalyst for him to explore uncharted musical territory. But before we get into his later works, let's talk about the impact of this transition from the classical to the Romantic style. What exactly changed in his music? Okay, so we're talking about this transition from the classical to the Romantic style in Beethoven's music. How would you explain that shift to someone who maybe isn't a music scholar?
Okay, so imagine listening to Mozart. You hear this clarity, balance, elegance. It's like walking through a perfectly symmetrical garden. Then you hear Beethoven, and it's like a storm has rolled in, just shaking everything up.
That's a very vivid image. So what specifically changed? Did he invent some new kind of note or something?
Not quite, but he did radically change how he used the building blocks of music. Take dynamics, for example, the loudness and softness of the music. Beethoven would use these extreme contrasts, going from like whisper quiet to thunderously loud within the same piece. This created a dramatic intensity that was rarely heard before.
So it's like he's playing with our emotions, keeping us on the edge of our seats.
Exactly. And it's not just dynamics. He also experimented with rhythm in a whole new way. He would introduce these driving, insistent rhythms that really propel the music forward, creating this sense of urgency and excitement. Sometimes he'd even throw in unexpected pauses or syncopations, disrupting the regular beat and giving the music this feeling of raw energy.
You know, now that you mention it, I am starting to hear those elements in some of his famous pieces, like his Fifth Symphony, that opening motif, da-da-da-da-do-me. It's so simple, yet it feels so powerful and driving.
That's a great example. That simple four-note motif is like a seed that Beethoven plants and then cultivates throughout the entire symphony. It's transformed, repeated, played by different instruments, and woven into these complex musical textures. This technique is called motivic development, and it became a hallmark of his style.
So it's not just about coming up with a catchy melody, it's about how you use that melody, how you develop it to create this whole world of sound and emotion.
Exactly. And Beethoven didn't just innovate with melody and rhythm. He also wasn't afraid to shake things up with the orchestra itself. He started adding instruments that weren't typically used in symphonies at the time, like the piccolo for its high, piercing sound, and the trombone for its deep, powerful tone.
It's like he was thinking, the bigger, the bolder, the better.
Well, in a way, yes. He wanted to create a richer, more expansive sound world that could convey the full range of human emotion. And this expansion of the orchestra had a huge impact on composers who came after him. It paved the way for the massive orchestral forces we hear in the late Romantic period and beyond.
So Beethoven wasn't just composing, he was redefining what a symphony could be. He was like a musical revolutionary.
I think that's a very apt description, but it's important to remember that this revolutionary spirit wasn't just about making the music bigger or louder. It was about expressing a deeper, more complex range of human experiences.
Okay, I'm ready to dive into some specific examples. You mentioned the Fifth Symphony. Can you tell me more about what makes it so groundbreaking?
Well, think back to that opening motif. Those four notes, they aren't just catchy. They represent a struggle, a force pushing against fate. And that struggle plays out across the entire symphony. The first movement is turbulent and dramatic, like a battle against these unseen forces. But then the music slowly starts to shift. By the final movement, we hear those same four notes transformed, now played in a triumphant major key. It's like a journey from darkness to light, from despair to victory.
Wow, that's powerful. It makes you hear the music in a whole new way.
And this idea of a musical journey, of transformation and transcendence, is at the heart of many of Beethoven's greatest works.
I'm curious to hear about some of those other works. You mentioned his late string quartets and piano sonatas. What makes him stand out?
Well, in his later works, Beethoven's style becomes even more personal, more introspective. His string quartets, for example, are incredibly complex and challenging. They're not necessarily written to please a crowd. It's almost as if he's having a private conversation with the listener, exploring his deepest thoughts and emotions through music.
So how does that translate into the actual sound of the music? What am I listening for when I hear one of these late quartets?
You'll notice a lot more dissonance, a clashing of notes that creates a sense of unease or tension. This wasn't just Beethoven being difficult. He was using these dissonant harmonies to express a new kind of emotional complexity. It's like he's pushing the boundaries of what music can convey.
So it's not always about beautiful melodies and predictable harmonies. It's about using sound to express the full range of human experience, even the difficult or uncomfortable parts.
Precisely. And this exploration of new sonic territory is also evident in his late piano sonatas. These are some of the most technically demanding pieces ever written for the piano, full of complex rhythms and harmonies. But beyond the technical brilliance, you hear these moments of sheer emotional power, ranging from profound sadness to ecstatic joy.
It sounds like Beethoven was a master of taking his own personal struggles and turning them into something universally relatable.
That's one of the reasons why his music still resonates with us today, centuries after it was written. He wasn't afraid to grapple with the big questions of life and death, of joy and sorrow. and to express those struggles through the power of music.
Speaking of struggles, we can't ignore the fact that Beethoven's life wasn't just about artistic triumphs. He faced a lot of challenges beyond his hearing loss, right? We talked about, Beethoven's revolutionary music, his incredible drive to compose even as he lost his hearing. But his life wasn't, just a triumphant symphony. He faced a lot of challenges beyond his hearing loss, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, we've touched on his difficult childhood, but the impact of his father's abuse, that really lingered throughout his life. Beethoven craved recognition and success, yet he could also be fiercely independent and rebellious, clashing with patrons and even fellow musicians.
And then there was the loss of his mother when he was just 17. Did that have a lasting impact on him?
He was deeply affected by her death. He described her as his best friend. And letters from that time reveal just the depth of his grief. Imagine losing such a vital source of love and support at such a young age, while also facing financial strain and the responsibility of caring for his younger brothers. It's a lot to bear.
Yeah. It's hard to imagine how he coped with all of that. Did he have close relationships that helped him through these tough times?
Beethoven's relationships were complex. He longed for connection, but could also be difficult and demanding. He fell in love several times, but never married. Some scholars believe he may have even proposed to one of his pupils, Josephine Brunswick, but her family disapproved due to his social standing.
So on top of everything else, he was dealing with heartbreak and social isolation.
Yes, and as his hearing worsened, that isolation just intensified. Imagine struggling to communicate, to participate in conversations. It's no wonder he became withdrawn, and sometimes even suspicious of those around him.
It's heartbreaking to think of this musical genius, this man who gave the world such incredible music, struggling with such loneliness and isolation.
It really is. But it's also a reminder that behind the grand symphonies and the towering reputation, there was a human being, wrestling with very real challenges. But it's also a testament to his spirit, that he never let those challenges extinguish his creative fire. Even as his world grew quieter, his inner world seemed to grow richer and more complex, which is reflected in his late masterpieces.
So even with all these personal struggles, Beethoven kept composing, pushing the boundaries of music further and further. What do you think fueled that relentless drive?
It's hard to say for certain, but I think it was more than just ambition or a desire for fame. I believe there was this deep-seated need within him to express himself, to connect with the world through music. It was his outlet, his refuge, and perhaps even his way of making sense of a world that was becoming increasingly difficult to navigate.
It's like his music was this bridge between his inner world and the outside world, a way of communicating what he couldn't express in words.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. And I think that's why his music continues to resonate with people centuries later. We hear those struggles, that yearning for connection, that search for meaning, and we recognize something of ourselves in it.
His music feels so intensely personal, yet it also speaks to something universal about the human experience. It's a reminder that even in the face of profound adversity, the human spirit can create something truly extraordinary.
And that's the legacy of Beethoven, isn't it? He wasn't just a composer. He was a symbol of resilience, of the power of the human will to overcome obstacles and to find beauty even in the darkest of times. His music is a gift that continues to inspire and uplift us, reminding us that even in silence, there can be music.
What a powerful thought to end on. Beethoven's life and music offers so much to contemplate, so much to learn from. I hope this deep dive has given you a new appreciation for the man behind the music, for the struggles and triumphs that shaped his genius, and for the enduring power of his musical legacy.
Thank you for joining us on this journey.